Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan could start hearing opening statements in the corruption trial he is standing for alongside co-defendants Mike McLean, longtime Madigan confidant, and also former state's representative and lobbyist. Well, somebody who's been in the courtroom all this time is Jim Talamonti, and he joins us now to talk about juror selection and how it's still ongoing in that federal courtroom up in Chicago. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for taking time with us. We've been keeping you updated on the Madigan case, and a lot of things are going to be happening in the weeks ahead. But to get more of where we're at in the case right now, let's connect with the Center Square's Jim Talamonti, who's been in the courtroom. Jim, thanks for taking time with us and breaking down what's going on there. So we're still looking at, 11 more weeks of trial?
Yes, that's the estimate. It's gone up from 10 to 11 just in the wake of the slow pace of questioning of jurors. And it's you expect with a high-profile defendant like Mike Madigan, a lot of people are going to be eliminated because of they're going in with preconceived ideas about Madigan. They've heard a lot about him. There's been a lot of questioning about what have you heard in the news, that kind of thing. So you expect that, but the slow pace of the questioning is what has, I think, gotten under the skin of a very, very patient judge, John Robert Blakey, who's let attorneys, to paraphrase the judge, you're litigating this. He said, I'm not going to rush the process. But then multiple times now he's suggested the possibility of what he called a shot clock. And he's not implemented that for jury questioning. But when he suggested that, the pace did pick up because we had attorneys, especially on the defense side, repeating the same question multiple times. Or one defense team would ask a question and the other defense team, McLean and Madigan have separate defense teams here, they would repeat the same question. And prosecutors were on board with the shot clock and he loved it. But the judge, made a point to them as well. It's like, well, you haven't objected. Some of these, if you object to some of these lines of questioning, I might sustain some of these, but so I'm not sure if the prosecution's been at times put to sleep, as some of us observing at times have been, by the slow pace of some of the defense attorneys in particular. But the process has taken, I would say, a lot longer than it should, just in terms of getting through people. There are people who are, spending their time making the sacrifice to be a potential juror, and they're up there on the stand for 35, 40, in some cases, 45 minutes, or even one or two were up there for almost an hour. And it really wasn't necessary, especially in the case of several who you felt early on were going to be struck by challenges and were not going to be part of the jury, but the questioning would continue, sometimes off topic. So it's been a slow moving process, even for a high profile case. But we are nearing the end of it. We need two more alternates and then opening statements. The target is Monday afternoon. The judge's instructions at 12:30. He says they'll take about 31 minutes. And then the attorneys did give their estimates for their opening statements. Prosecutors 2 hours, and then the defense attorneys 1 hour from the Madigan team and 1 hour from the McLean team.
So clearly things are going to be picking up pace a bit, especially as you get opening statements and then you get the prosecution bringing up witnesses, showing off evidence, playing, I'm sure, recordings, either video or audio. It really is going to be interesting to see what kinds of evidence they do present and then the defense responding to all of that. But back to the jury, why is it so important from some of the observers you talk to of trying to weed out somebody who may have a preconceived notion about lobbying, or a preconceived notion about Madigan, or a preconceived notion about prosecution of cases like these? Why is this so important that they get this right?
Yeah, well, I think that just several reasons, but I think in particular, there've really been a lot of questions about feelings about this, feelings about that. One prospective juror who didn't make it was talked about how he watches Fox News, and then the defense attorney Tom Breen, one of the Madigan attorneys, proceeded to go on about how, there's a political side to Fox News, and he got into several political issues, which would seem to have nothing to do with this trial, but just kind of linking the fact that, Madigan was a supporter of same-sex marriage. Madigan, there's been a lot of talk about unions, of course. So people who may have feelings one way or of the other about these things would that influence their decision about Madigan? It shouldn't. The judge multiple times and attorneys even have asked, well, can you be fair? Can you put your feelings aside and only follow the law as described by the judge? And people one after another, prospective jurors, have said yes. So in really, Greg, you're right. Just because you may have heard something negative about Mike Madden doesn't mean you can't apply the law correctly, right? But defense attorneys have been very focused on that. And on the McLean side, lobbying is a big thing, as you mentioned, because McLean was a state rep, went right into being a lobbyist. I talked a few weeks ago with State Rep Dave Severin about how we really need ethics reform here, and that people can go right from being a lawmaker to a lobbyist, and there's a lot of overlap, so to speak. He didn't use that word, but it's too. There should be a cooling off period,
Yeah,
essentially, is what
the revolving
Representative Severin said.
door. Yeah, the revolving door at the state house is interesting to see, especially if you get a legislator who retires in the middle of their term, and then just moments later they then pop into being a lobbyist, and it's fascinating to see that. So yeah, clearly there's going to be a lot of conversation leading up to the election about Madigan's case, and then you get veto session after that, and Madigan's case is going to continue. So that'll be hanging over veto session, and whether or not they act on any kind of ethics reforms at the state house during fall veto session, I guess we'll see. But Jim, it's very possible this case could stretch into the early part of the new year.
I think that, and a number of other reporters in the media pool have been regularly covering this, and I don't sense we've had quite the media hordes that we had in the days of the Blagojevich trial or the George Ryan trial before that, which is a little troubling, I think. And one of the experts I talked to this week, Lisa Kaplan from Reform for Illinois, was concerned about that. Here's Mike Madigan was more powerful than Blagojevich or Ryan, I would argue. For 30 years, he was the speaker, and pretty much all legislation went through him. And as Representative Severin said, if you weren't, he would make sure things he didn't like would not even get to committee. There was so much power and control, and yet it seems that this has been, as Elisa Kaplan said, maybe overshadowed by, obviously we're going into a presidential election. That a lot of people, and some prospective jurors have talked about that when they're pressed on politics. Well, I'm following the presidential election. They're not so into the local, sausage making of government. But even so, this is a major case. And especially when you look at how long it took to build this case against Madigan. I mean, going back 10 years, with some of the work that the prosecution and the federal prosecutors put into this, it's really remarkable how long it's taken to get us to this point. So I guess I shouldn't be bothered by a little bit of inefficiency here and there in the courtroom if the truth is ultimately arrived at. But again, it's been a little bit of a slow process at times.
Yeah, so the impact this is going to have on the election unknown, the impact it's going to have on the legislature in fall veto session, or for lame duck session at the beginning of January, if it stretches on into that, because Jim, we got the holiday season coming up rapidly. Has there been any indication of the judge kind of laying out the schedule? What's going to happen around Thanksgiving? What's going to happen around Christmas or even New Year?
Yeah, well, he has said, a couple of prospective jurors said, well, I have a trip planned for, December 27th or, dates. He said, well, I don't think this will affect that. And there were some, muffled mumblings in the overflow courtroom among media saying, well, the way we're going here, this, one reporter said, we may not have opening statements till Thanksgiving. Well, that he was exaggerating, but unless the pace picks up, and he may have to implement the shot clock. He's talked about doing this for when witnesses take the stand. He says, I don't want to do this, but if I see inefficiency or if I feel I have to, I will. And again, this is probably more targeting the defense, although prosecutors too at times. There's been a lot of questioning about video games. Apparently they have concerns. And I think this was a factor in either the ComEd trial or one of the related trials before that the concern about gamers not being able to tear themselves away from those communities and be a focused juror. So make what you will of that. But I'm concerned that just by the way things have moved. Not that 2 weeks is an incredible amount of time for jury selection. And again, a case with someone as as big a name as Mike Madigan, who's been in news stories on and off for 50 years.
Yeah, well, it's not just Madigan. I mean, it's McLean, too. So that also
right, and
adds, you got two defendants here adding to the complexities of all this.
And I will say McLean's team especially has been a little more focused, and especially since the judge talked about the show, they've been pretty short. But a couple of the Madigan attorneys have really, they're in no, perhaps I'm being cynical here, but as someone who's concerned, you watch the way that inefficiencies would happen in state government and the lack of regard at times for taxpayer dollars in the legislature. And you move that into this judicial proceeding. You say, well, these defense attorneys obviously don't care about the jurors' time or anyone else. One of the security attendant in the when the judge called for a short lunch break, he was disappointed. He said, "Boy, they're punishing us for these attorneys taking so long with their questions." So the lack of regard for others' time is a little bit disturbing. As we're taxpayers, we're paying for all this, and so it's I think anyone who's been called for a jury summons at one point or another has seen that things can move slowly, and it's part of that's maybe necessary. We don't want to go back to the days of tarring and feathering people. And I was thinking to myself, and 200 years ago, Mike Madigan would have been out of town on a rail, right? So we want to have correct and fair justice, but if we don't pick up the pace, you're right, Greg. This is going to drag on longer, and then you get into conflicts where jurors say, "Hey, you said 10, 11 weeks, and now we're talking. If we're talking 12 or 14, we can have a problem." So it really has to move along. The judge has intimated that. But unless he gets a little bit tougher and maybe implements more of an old school, stricter courtroom here with these attorneys, and because at times they're like toddlers. If they're given a long leash, they're going to run with it.
Jim Talamonti, Chicago reporter for the Center Square, inside the federal courtroom where Mike Madigan and Mike McLean face corruption charges. Jury selection starting to see the end of the tunnel, and we could have opening statements coming in the afternoon hours Monday. And you'll obviously we'll have Brett Rowland there as well, covering some things. So you guys are tag teaming, making sure we keep people informed of where we're at on all this. So greatly appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Greg. And yeah, Brett's got a great background. He covered the ComEd 4 trial, and he'll be ready for Monday. I think, and the McLean team to Tuesday, we're okay with that, because I sensed that the Madigan team wasn't, that they wanted their opening arguments to immediately follow the prosecution. But if the jury selection drags into the afternoon, the opening statements could drag into Tuesday morning. But I think it looks pretty good, unless there's really an issue with jury selection. We should get into opening statements on Monday afternoon. But if we can't get both prosecutors 2 hours and then Madigan's hour in on Monday, then it could all push to Tuesday. And then again, like you said, we're losing another day. You think about, will there be an early exit for Halloween? Will there be court on Election Day? That's not an official holiday, but you have to give people a chance to vote. So there's a lot of, and then the other holidays after that. So you're right. We've got quite a road ahead.
We'll definitely stay up to date. Jim Talamonti with the Center Square. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit later on today. All right.
Thanks, Greg.
It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. This is with America's Talking Network and thecentersquare.com.